Hi, Tohi. This story that I'm going to read to you is a true story that a great grandma is telling her great grandchildren. And you have a great grandma. Her name's Callie. I think you've met her. I think that's the only great grandma you have right now. I'm your grandma, and if my mom were still here, she would be your great grandma. Okay? So, back about 150 years ago, a lot of the people lived on the east side of the United States, and they would travel all the way across the United States to come to the west coast of the United States. And that's where Grandpa and I live, and your Grandpa Dave. We live on the west coast of the United States. And people didn't have cars back then. There weren't even trains running over to the west coast of the United States at first. So people who wanted to move to the west coast, they came in big wooden wagons with great big wooden wheels, and they would have cloth covers on top, kind of like a tent, that they would put all their things in the wagon, and the tent, the white cover would cover them up so it wouldn't get dirt or rain in there. And then they would have like big cows called oxen pulling the wagon, or they might have horses pulling the wagon, or they might have mules pulling the wagon. And it would take about 6 months to travel from the east to the west. And it was a really hard trip, because once they got across all these big flat prairies, they had to go over the mountains to get to the coast. Okay, so that's what this story is about. It's about a family's trip in their covered wagon from the east to the west. So here we go. Are you lucky enough to have a great grandma? If so, then, the first chance you get, ask her to tell you some of the things that happened to her when she was a little girl. I wouldn't be surprised if they proved to be the most interesting stories you have heard. Grandma McAlpine was like that. Although she was 90 years of age, she could remember almost everything about her childhood and how her grandchildren and great-grandchildren did love to listen to her. One evening, Frank and Bessie were visiting her in her home, and soon they were trying to persuade her to tell them one of her grand old stories of long ago. Please, Grandma, urged Bessie, just one. We love to listen to your stories. Do please, chimed in Frank. You know, Grandma, that one you promised to tell us about the mysterious writer. A smile came over Grandma's face. All right then, said Grandma, make yourselves comfortable, and I'll tell you that one now. Frank and Bessie sat themselves as close to Grandma as they could and looked up expectantly into her face, knowing that a rare treat was in store for them. This all took place, Grandma began, when I was a little girl of 5, but I remember it as though it had happened yesterday. But to begin my story, I must go back farther still, continued Grandma. 100 years or so before that, my great-grandfather left the old country and set sail with his family for America. Now, her great-grandfather came from someplace in Europe. It doesn't tell us where in Europe, but he came from Europe, and he came across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. They settled in New England, and the children grew up and moved into farms of their own. Into one of those families my father was born. When he was a young man, he heard people talking about the wonderful West. Away out toward the sunset, it was said, there were thousands and thousands of square miles of marvelous forests, where grew the greatest trees that man had ever seen. The soil was so rich that it would grow finer wheat than any farmer had ever raised. In fact, there was everything there that the heart of man could desire. And you know what? I don't know why my camera is wiggling like that, but I can't make it stop. I don't know how to do it, so it's just going to have to wiggle. My father listened, and it seemed promising to him. It was just what he wanted, so he talked to my mother, and finally they decided to go. It meant a journey of 3,000 miles across open prairies, through forests and rivers and over mountain chains. And for a large part of the journey, all their goods had to be crowded into one old covered wagon, said Bessie. Well, just a word. Tell us about, let's see. It meant a journey of 3,000 miles across open prairies, through forests and rivers and over mountain chains, and for a large part of the journey, all their goods had to be crowded into one old covered wagon drawn by 2 oxen. Tell us about the covered wagon, said Betsy. Well, just a word, said Grandma, for we haven't gotten to the real story yet. Most of the covered wagons were built of strong, thick planks. They were made watertight so that they could be used as boats in crossing rivers. Well, here's a picture. See, there's a wooden wagon with a white cover on the top. And see those 2, they look like cows. They're boy cows, and they're called oxen. And they would pull the wagon. Usually, several families traveled together, not only for company, but to guard against Indians who often attacked these caravans, trying to drive off the white people who were taking their lands. And did you travel in one of those covered wagons? Asked Bessie, her eyes wide open with wonder. Yes, I surely did, said Grandma. I was only 5 when we started, but I can still see everything that happened on that long, long journey. How long did it take? Asked Frank. More than 6 months, said Grandma. We left home in April as soon as the snow was gone, and it was October before we caught sight of Mount Hood in Oregon, far to the west. There were 7 or 8 other wagons in our wagon train, and by day we moved slowly on, just as fast as the oxen would go. Some days it was very, very hot, and then we would all get terribly thirsty. I think the oxen felt it more than we did, because they had most of the work to do. I remember one day we had traveled many miles without water. Suddenly the oxen stopped. They refused to haul the wagon another yard. Father took the yokes off them, and suddenly they started to run. They had either seen or scented water more than a mile away, but they were too weary to take the wagon with them. Did you catch them? Asked Frank. Oh, yes, said Grandma. That was easy. They only wanted to drink. Then we started off again. But the rider, the mysterious rider, when did he appear? Just you wait a minute, said Grandma. We're coming to that, all in good time. Some other things were to happen first. As we rode on day after day, week after week, month after month, the poor oxen became more and more footsore and weary. Father did not dare to let them rest very much, for he knew that he had to get over the mountains before the snow would fall. Then, too, the food began to give out. We were allowed just so much a day and no more, for Father said if we were delayed and ran out of food, we would die on the way. And so, with the oxen becoming more and more tired and Father getting more and more worried, we moved on westward. At long last, we began to climb the Cascade Mountains. I can't think how anyone ever found a way across, for there were no beautiful roads as there are nowadays, and it was all so wild and rocky that we were nearly jolted out of the wagon many a time. Still, we went on climbing up and up, with the oxen panting and sweating in front, and Father shoving his hardest behind. At last we reached the summit, and from there we could see Mount Hood, its white peak gleaming in the morning sun. We knew that there would be still many more days of travel, yet it seemed to us then that the journey was almost over. There's a picture of somebody painted of the wagon up on top of the hill. And then, that very morning, one of our oxen died. The climb up the mountains had been too much for it. We were left with one ox, and one could never pull that heavy wagon. Father was at his wits' end to know what to do. He talked to the people in the other wagons. They were sorry, but they could not do anything. Their oxen, too, were almost worn out, and their food was almost gone. They felt that they had to go on without us, and so they did. I shall never forget how we all felt when the last wagon had gone out of sight down this steep, rough trail. There we were, alone on the summit of the Cascade Mountains, with no means of getting away and only enough food to last us 2 or 3 days. Night came on. It was very cold. Father wondered whether the snow would come and what we would do then. He kindled a fire and gave us something to eat, and then I was put to bed, but he and Mother sat up and talked about what they would do. By and by Father said to Mother, "Surely the great God who has brought us in safety all this long way, through so many troubles, will not desert us now. Let us kneel here on the mountain top and tell him of our plight." And there they knelt, the two of them, in the dark, with the cold wind blowing around them, as they told God all that had happened and how they trusted him to deliver them. Then they arose, and soon after that they tried to sleep. The night wore on. Upon our little lonely camp the bright cold stars looked down. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Dawn was just beginning to break when Father sat up. The silence had been broken by a strange sound. Clippity-clop, clippity-clop, clippity-clop. "Horses!" whispered Father. "Do you think it's Injuns?" whispered Mother, leaping to his side. "I'm sure there must be many of them around here." "I don't know," said Father, his voice very calm and steady. "We must wait and see." They stood quietly beside the wagon, listening and watching as the sound of the horses' hoofs came ever nearer and nearer. Suddenly, out of the darkness came a voice. "Hi there!" cried someone. "Who is it?" called Father. "A friend," was the answer. In the dim morning light, Father could just make out the form of a man on horseback, with another horse beside him. He walked over to the stranger, wondering who he might be. "Are you in trouble?" asked the mysterious stranger. "We are," said Father. "Desperate trouble. One of our oxen has died. We are stranded here with scarcely any food left." Then the stranger told his story. "At 2 o'clock this morning," he said, "I was suddenly awakened, and a voice seemed to say to me, 'There is someone in trouble on the mountains. Go and help him.' So I got up at once, saddled my 2 horses, and started off. I was determined not to stop until I found the one who needed help. What can I do for you?" The mysterious rider took us to his own home and fed us. Then he lent us another ox so that we were able to reach the end of our journey in safety. "What was the name of the mysterious rider?" asked Frank. "He never told us," said Grandma. "He just said we were to call him the Colonel, and we have called him that ever since." "But who gave him the message that you were in trouble?" asked Bessie. "Ah," said Grandma, "that is the most wonderful part of the story, for there was no telephone or telegraph anywhere near there. All Father could do was to tell God, and God did all the rest. All my life," she added, "I have never forgotten that terrible night on the mountains, when God sent the mysterious rider to our rescue. And children, I want you ever to remember that the great God, whom we love and serve, never forgets his own. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him." That's a pretty good story, isn't it? Really good, true story. Here's a picture of the mysterious rider who came in the night with a horse. And this is, I don't know if you can see this picture, but he took them home to his house and gave them some dinner. And God answered their prayer, sent that man to help him. Pretty neat, huh? Anyway, I love you. See you later. Bye.